Welcome back to Half the Battle. I'm your host, as always, Daniel Levy, your co-host, Shaq. We're going to be talking UFC Vegas, Dustin Poirier versus Dan Hooker. And Shaq, it's going down this Saturday in Las Vegas, Nevada. Two of the most exciting fighters in the history of the lightweight division are going to clash in the main event. And I have a feeling that someone might be going to sleep on Saturday night in Vegas, Shaq.
100%, man. You got two top five guys, Dustin Poirier, the former interim champ, Dan Hooker, ever since he lost he lost to Edson Barboza, man, he's been on a roll with wins over Vic, Felder, and who else did he beat in there again? And Ali Akenta. And he's got a win over the number one contender at welterweight in Gilbert Burns, a knockout win. So Dan Hooker, he earned this spot, and I'm excited to see what happens on Saturday night because the winner is right there back in title contention.
And it's an interesting spot for Poirier, man, because this is a guy who – obviously, he's always been an incredible fighter. He's always been perennial top five, but the last couple of years, he picked it up to a different gear, and he even made it to that interim title spot and got the belt. And, you know, unfortunately, didn't get the unified belt against Khabib. And now he's at that point where, historically speaking, fighters coming off the title losses, that's when they begin the regression part of their career. But when you look at a guy like Dustin Poirier, he might be one of those few rare exceptions that can stay at the top despite taking that title loss to Khabib, Shaq.
Yeah, and that comes with his mindset, man. This guy, has built himself back up after losses in the past. And, like you said, sometimes that can be a little bit of a dreaded spot right there. Is the motivation still there? But we're going to find out on Saturday night.
And one thing we know for a fact about Hooker is, I mean, his last name says it all. This guy comes in there to bang, and if you're not quite on your game against a guy like Dan Hooker, he can knock you out, he can choke you out, he can go the full 5-round distance. So Dustin Poirier needs to be at his A game to not just win this fight, but to dominate this fight. And for Dan Hooker, the biggest opportunity of his mixed martial arts career.
Yeah, I mean, Hooker, they kind of have similar stories in a way, both former 45ers that moved up to 155 pounds. And, Hooker, he's done very well for himself. He's very confident. And, this is a big opportunity, man. He's trying to achieve his dreams, and why not against a 155 legend, a 145 legend in Dustin Poirier,
Absolutely. So I definitely cannot wait to see what happens in the main event. So before we break down this whole card start to finish, got to let you know to check out our bets at bestfightpicks.com. Use my promo code DAN25 for 25% off my bets. Use Shaq's promo code Shaq50 for 50% off his, or use our promo code 2020 for 20% off the VIPs. And Shaq, let's get right down to business, because first up in the featherweight division, we got a matchup between Jordan Griffin, he's 18-7, and Yussef Zalal is 8-2. Currently, they got Yussef Zalal minus 125. The comeback on Jordan Griffin is plus 105. Well, Shaq, I know that Yussef Zalal impressed a lot of people in his UFC debut, showed a really well-rounded MMA skill set. And if you compare that to some of his regional fights, the kid's definitely making big leaps every single time we see him. And with Jordan Griffin, I mean, this guy's a serious vet. And if you're not quite ready for him, he will choke you out. The question is Yussef Zalal ready to swim with Jordan Griffin here on Saturday?
Man, yeah, this is a tough fight. Jordan Griffin was finally able to get that first UFC win with that win over TJ Brown. And his first two fights, he had some tough competition. Skelly, who's like 18-4, and then he had Dan Ige, who's doing his thing, top 10, if I'm not mistaken. So, Griffin, he kind of has, these mental lapses in the grappling. He's a submission over position guy. He likes to go for the guillotines and the Darce chokes and things along those lines. And then you got Yussef Zalal, who, man, the one thing I like about these little Factory X guys, man, they all got good footwork, man. Him, Gutierrez, Roy Val. These guys know how to move laterally around the cage, and they're very hard to track down. So, when I see these guys match up, I definitely think Zalal's got better footwork, enough to frustrate Griffin and dance around the cage and, maybe time a single leg here and there or a double leg and possibly capitalize on the mistakes in the grappling of Griffin. But there's no denying that I do feel like Griffin is a little bit more experienced. I do feel like he's got slightly better boxing. It's just Griffin, I mean, even his win over TJ Brown, he was kind of losing the majority of that fight. But I also think it was one of those cases where TJ Brown came out so hell bent on the takedown that Griffin was almost kind of letting him wear himself out. Letting the kid gas himself out and, looking to pick up the win in the late rounds. And that's exactly what he did. So, I feel like this is a 50-50 fight. I feel like Zalal projects out to be the better fighter. But right now, currently, man, I'm actually going to go with Griffin. I think he's slightly more experienced. I think he'll be a little bit more comfortable now that he got that weight off his shoulders of that first UFC win. But I'm super impressed with Zalal. I wouldn't be shocked if he got the win here. I just think that Austin Lingo, I don't want to say he's a fraud or anything like that, but when you look at Austin Lingo, he kind of really hadn't fought anybody. He all his fights finished in like a minute or two, like a lot of these newcomers that we've been seeing in the UFC lately. And I know Zalal was coming off 2 losses in his last 3 fights, but the kid's super tough. He's never been finished. But I think that Austin Lingo was a little bit compromised that night. But I'm gonna go with Griffin by a close decision in a back and forth fight. But it wouldn't shock me if it went the other way.
Yeah, it's funny. I thought we were actually going to disagree on this fight, but it turns out we agree, man. Because, look, Zalal is very, very talented. He's a well-rounded fighter. His footwork, like you mentioned, the side-to-side, the calf kicks, and also you start to grapple with a guy like him. He's got a nasty Darce choke. His headlock series is really good, and he can mix in takedowns of his own. So he's a very well-rounded young fighter. So I'm excited to see what the future holds for a guy like Yussef Zalal. It's just that most of the guys he's beaten, not to discredit his wins at all, but all the guys he's beaten haven't even had 10 pro wins yet. And, that's not to say that can't change here with a win over Jordan Griffin. But what I am saying is he's fighting very unexperienced fighters. And here against Jordan Griffin's the complete opposite of having not too much experience. This is a guy who's been in the trenches for many years. I mean, he's had over 20 pro fights. He's been there. He's done that. He even won a round off Dan Ige. You understand what I'm saying? So I think that as long as, look, I know he's going to get taken down. It's a Jordan Griffin fight. He gets taken down every single fight. But as long as he's not held down, I think that he's going to make Yussef Zalal work for everything. And also, one thing about Yussef, even though I love his well-rounded skill set, he kind of fights with his hands down, and the right opponent is going to make him pay for that. And I think Jordan Griffin might have the right pressure, the right experience to capitalize on the openings there. So I'm going to also go with Jordan Griffin to kind of vet this one out, and we'll see what happens. Now, next up in the strawweight division, we got a matchup between Jin Yeu Frey, she's 9-4, and Kay Hansen is 6-3. Currently, they got Kay Hansen -165. The comeback on Jin Yeu Frey is +145. Well, you got the former Invicta atomweight champion in Jin Yeu Frey taking on a 20-year-old, somewhat of a prospect in Kay Hansen. And look, it's striker versus grappler. Jin Yeu Frey wants to keep the standing the entire time. Kay Hansen wants to mix in her takedowns. And from what I've seen, Jin Yeu Frey couldn't get up from bottom against these atom weights. So what's going to happen when she moves up a weight class? Now, granted, I know those weight cuts were getting tough for her, so she might look a little better here. And while this is standing, she should be able to outpoint Kay Hansen. The thing is, as soon as she's taken down, I'm not convinced she's getting back up. So I'm going to go with Kay Hansen via decision here, Shaq.
Yeah, I'm going to just keep this one brief. I'm going to go with the person that didn't lose to Jody Escobar. So, I'm going to go with Kay Hansen as well.
So next up, in the welterweight division, we got a matchup between Takashi Sato, who's 15-3, and Jason Witt is 17-5. Now, currently, there's no odds since this fight was just announced, but I'm assuming that Takashi Sato will be favored in this spot. So, look, Takashi Sato, he's got that karate style. He's very hard to take down. Bilal only took him down 2 times out of the 9 attempts he had. Sato's got a very good judo base. His hips are on point in terms of stuffing those takedowns. And if you overextend on one of those takedown attempts, he can judo throw you as well. And he's also a sniper on the feet. He likes to hang back. But when it's time to land that straight left counter, he's knocked a lot of people out. On the downside, his chin is a little bit questionable. And maybe, you can definitely go out there and pressure this guy and overwhelm him so he can be beat. With Jason Witt, look, he's very experienced. He's way more experienced than the original opponent, Ramiz Brahimaj. But the thing is here that he's taking the fight on a day notice. So I don't know what kind of shape he's in. But what I do know is he's got a wrestling background. He's won 9 of his last 10 fights. He's kind of big for the weight class. So He's an interesting guy, but I'm going to lean with Sato just because he's had the full camp, the UFC experience, all those things. But, man, we've seen crazier things. We saw Justin James go out there, get a first-minute knockout, on a day notice in his debut. So I wouldn't be surprised, but I'm going to still lean with Sato here, Shaq.
Yeah, gotta go with Sato. I think he's gonna be a little bit more disciplined in comparison to Frank Camacho, who missed weight by like 2 or 3 pounds for his fight with Justin James, and then got knocked out. So yeah, I think Sato should get the win here. It's unfortunate. I was looking forward to that matchup with the Arab guy. Man, he was that guy had some big slams and some good takedowns. So I was really interested to see how that fight went. But unfortunately, he gets a new opponent. So I'm glad Sato gets the fight. But man, he actually took down Bilal, if I'm not mistaken, in that fight as well. So I think he's got a decent skill set. His striking, he kind of throws the same type of punches over and over, the jab and the straight, and guys can pick it up and start countering him, which leads to him getting dropped. I mean, I've seen Sato floored on numerous occasions. So, and Ben Saunders wobbled him as well. So this guy is somewhat very chinny, but like you said, he gets taken down, but he knows how to get back up. So I'm gonna go with Sato here, probably by knockout.
Now, next up in the lightweight division, we got a matchup between Luis Violent Bob Ross Pena. He's 8-2, and Khama Worthy is 15-6. Currently, they got Luis Pena minus 230. The comeback on Khama Worthy is plus 190. Shaq, this is a really, really intriguing battle here. So Khama Worthy is an interesting spot because a lot of people are saying that all the pressure is on Luis Pena, and I completely disagree. The reason why is because, look, even though Khama Worthy is the underdog here and you'd think the pressure is off of him, he's got a lot to prove because if he goes out there and loses this fight, not only will he take an L on his record, but then people are going to start to say the Villante Smith fight was a fluke and this and that. Whereas on the flip side, if he can go out here and get this win over Luis Pena, all of a sudden we're looking at a guy that beat Villante Smith and Luis Pena. He might get a big fight next. Now, stylistically speaking, I did like the Michael Johnson fight more for Khama Worthy. I was actually low-key going to bet Khama Worthy there at plus 220 odds. I felt like he could have capitalized on a mistake that Johnson brings to the table. Here with Pena, it's interesting because Khama does have more experience. Pena's the longer man, and Pena has really been using that length. He's got a nice volume style. He can time the knees, the long strikes, the whole bit. And on the ground, he's very funky as well. My whole thing here is that I know Khama hits like a truck, so Luis is going to try to most likely get this to the ground. That's where I got the question, man, because like out of all the fights I've seen of Khama Worthy, and I've seen over 10 fights of his, I still don't really know what his grappling is like, man. I don't know what his takedown defense is like. The only grappling I've seen from him, I saw him choke one guy out a long time ago. That's about the extent of it. So I really do not know what his ground game looks like because I think on the feet, while Pena has the more volume, I think that Worthy can land some serious bombs. One thing about Worthy, I got to give him credit. He's never lost a decision before, and that speaks volumes for a guy who's had over 20 pro fights. So, but on the flip side, he's been knocked out cold more than once, more than twice, more than thrice, 4 or 5 times, Shaq. Now, most of those were at 145 pounds. So the question is, was he cutting too much weight at featherweight? Is he taking the shots better at 55, or does he simply not have the best chin? So I still have a lot of questions here, and I'm going to lean with Luis Pena just because I feel like, I got more things answered on him. But this might be a dog or pass situation. It might be. So I'm very intrigued to see exactly what happens here on Saturday night, Shaq.
Yeah, this is a good matchup because, like you said, Khama Worthy's got a lot to prove. You want to see if the Villante Smith fight was a fluke or not. But, man, I actually think that something had to happen in training between those two because from what I hear, Villante Smith used to train at Khama Worthy's gym. And, I guess when Khama Worthy got the call, I don't know if Villante Smith had a flashback or something, but, he just wasn't as aggressive and he ended up getting knocked out, man. I've kind of been a little bit critical of Pena in the past just because I think that, he had this idea that, he was going to come into the UFC and, I remember a couple of fights ago, this dude was talking about fighting Mark DeCasey and all this nonsense, I was like, oh man, this guy, I think he ended up losing to Frivola right after that close fight. A lot of people thought that he should have got the nod, but sometimes where Luis, struggles at is kind of in these heated up fights. For Vola, he's kind of a supercharged up guy, and he kind of broke Luis at times, man. He kind of pushed the pace on him. Same thing as Trezano, and Luis was kind of showing the frustration on his face. We know that his grappling's really good. We know that he's got, good long boxing. He kind of leaves his chin up in the air. And Khama Worthy's one of these guys where if you watch tape on him, it's not very impressive. I mean, he's very stiff. He doesn't move his feet. He doesn't really move his head either. But the good thing he's got going for him is that, one, he's very confident in himself. And two, that, he's got very sneaky power. He kind of has power in a funky spot. He's like an ox. It's not very pretty, but hitting the guy hurts, and when he hits you, it hurts. He's one of these very sneaky, strong guys. So, I feel like Luis Pena projects out to be the better fighter, and I think he's the more well-rounded fighter. It's just that Khama Worthy has a lot of experience. He's been in a lot of these spots where he's gone up against the prospect. And I do feel like Luis Pena still isn't quite there just yet. But I do think he'll get the win, but I think it's going to be a tough fight, man. I think Khama Worthy, the reason why we haven't seen him, we don't know what his grappling is like because he's too strong. I don't think Luis, if he's thinking of coming out here that he's going to, body lock this guy and take him down, I think he's got another thing coming. I think it's a matter of the hard shots of Khama Worthy versus the kicks and the volume of Luis Pena. So I'm gonna go with Pena by a close decision. So I do think it's a dog or pass situation. But Pena's been training at ATT, switch camps. Maybe he gets a little better. But at times I have seen him show visible frustration on his face in that cage, force takedowns from far out, and not look too good in some spots. But he does have a lot of talent, so I'm gonna go with him. And I think he just has a more wider array of a technique, so I'm gonna go with him by a 29-28 decision.
Yeah, and speaking of Luis Pena, training at ATT now, I heard Khama Worthy say that he's been training with a bunch of Penn State wrestlers, so that might be another reason wwhy we haven't seen him taken down too much. So I'm very curious to see him implement that here. Now, next up in the featherweight division, we got a matchup between Sean Woodson, he's 7-0, and Julian Erosa is 23-8. Currently, they got Sean Woodson minus 475. The comeback on Julian Erosa is plus 380. Well, Shaq, we have around the same line as we had, against Julio Arce, maybe a little bit wider because I know we moved in on Julio Arce when it was a little bit, in the minus 3-something range. And look, we max bet Julio Arce against Julian Erosa. And even though Arce won every single round of that fight, man, I was sweating that entire time. And but eventually he got the knockout win. Now, you went on record, you called Sean Woodson a matchup problem. One thing about Erosa, though, is he's 6'1", so the height advantage isn't going to be too big here, but Woodson still has a 4-inch reach advantage. You think Woodson's going to present some problems to the very experienced Julian Erosa here?
Yeah, look, Julian Erosa is a tough kid, but we know the deal here. The guy fights with his hands down, his chin up in the air. Very tough kid. He's got a lot of spirit about himself. The Grant Dawson fight was entertaining, but he ended up gassing out there. Like the Arce fight, he definitely put some pressure on Arce. He's a lot taller than Arce, but in this fight, maybe the check knee, Woodson's main weapon, might not necessarily be there like it will be in other fights, but I still think Woodson gets the job here. Julian Erosa just gets hit way too much. He fights with his hands completely down. He gasses out, and we know that what the deal is. They just needed somebody to come take this ass whooping because of Kyle Nelson couldn't leave Canada. So I think Sean Woodson, I got him by TKO. But Matt, maybe it's one of those spots where he feels a little, like he's got a lot to lose, and he just plays it safe and keeps it smart. In which I think he's the more technical guy as well. So, Sean Woodson's weakness is the clinch, the wrestling. That aspect of the game. And I don't think Julian Erosa necessarily brings that unless he switches things up. But I just don't think he's going to have the cardio to do it on Saturday night. So got to go with Sean Woodson by finish here.
Yeah, this is really interesting, man, because obviously we mentioned that normally Woodson has this huge height advantage over everyone. He's a 6'2" featherweight with a 79-inch reach, but Erosa is 6'1", so the height isn't going to be too big here. The thing is that while Erosa's a very tough guy, he's very experienced. You know, after the Arce fight, he even went back to the regional scene and, you know, choked some guy out in the first round. So, you know what I mean? He redeemed himself, got the call back. Here's just an issue where Erosa fights hard. He's got good footwork, but when he comes in to exchange in the pocket, his hands are going to be down. He's going to get countered with a hook, with a straight, with something, and I think he's going to get slept once again, man. Just the way they match up, you know, if you want to stand toe-to-toe with a guy like Sean Woodson, he's cleaner, he's crisper, he's more accurate, he's more precise, and I think that's going to be the difference here. So while the line might seem wide to some, I think the way it plays out, it's going to be justified on Saturday night, Shaq. And also I want to say this. I think Kyle Nelson was a tougher matchup because Kyle Nelson brings a serious KO threat, especially in the first 7 minutes. You know, he just has a bit of a gas tank issue, whereas Erosa has a chin issue. But man, those first 5 minutes with Kyle Nelson is hell on wheels. So, you know, Woodson was gonna have to mind his P's and Q's there, but I think this might be a little bit of an easier fight. We'll see. Now, next up in the heavyweight division, we got a matchup between Tanner Boser, he's 17-6, and Philipe Linge is 14-4. Currently, they got Tanner Boser -115 and Philipe Linge is -105. So Shaq, obviously a lot of the hype that Philipe Linge had coming in from PFL has been taken away. I mean, he was a favorite over Arlovsky, but when you pull the kind of stunt he pulled and you stop throwing after round 1, you're not going to be as respected at the betting window. But at the same time, Arlovsky has a way of making these guys have those low-volume fights with him. That's what he was able to do with Philipe Linge. You think Linge can get back on track here against a very tough Boser who also has pretty good output for the heavyweight division?
Man, I'm looking forward to this fight very, very much. I know not too many people are high on these guys, but I'm looking forward to this fight just for the reason that, you know, I really feel like this is one of the cases of where people have things a little bit misconstrued, man. I think that, you know, people are kind of shitting on Linge because, oh my God, you know, he lost to Arlovsky. You know, Arlovsky loses every fight, but that's not the way I look at it, man. I feel like Arlovsky is a tough test for these young guys, especially in a UFC debut. I mean, we're talking about a guy that went to split decision with Walt Harris. I mean, going into that fight, everyone thought Walt Harris was going to knock him out in the first round. You know, he went to a split decision with Augusto Sakai, who's undefeated in the UFC. That was Augusto Sakai's toughest fight, in my opinion. Arlovsky, look, yeah, he loses the majority of his fights, but yeah, so yeah, I think that although Arlovsky has got a bad UFC record, that he gives people a lot of tough fights, and he's a very fast heavyweight. And I think Linge, that was a step up in competition from for him coming up from PFL, fighting the likes of Nicholson and these guys like that, in which he dominated those fights. And I still think Arlovsky is a respectable fighter. So losing to him, really, I don't like think that Philipe Linge sucks by any means. I think that people are actually overrating the skills of Tanner Boser. I think Tanner Boser, you know, when he came into the UFC, we all thought he sucked, but then he had that nice win over Daniel Spitz. But bro, look at Daniel Spitz's record. Daniel Spitz, honestly, like, is not UFC caliber, man. Like, he's got one win over Anthony Freight Train Hamilton, who you know, has no chin. And Tanner Boser, you know, did his job. He hit Spitz more times than Spitz hit him, and he moved around. But I don't think there's anything special with this guy, man. I think he's, you know, average, slow. He moves away. He's not very aggressive. He throws single shots at a time. And I think that Linge just slightly misjudged. I think he probably came in with the hopes of putting Arlovsky, you know, out in the fifth row with the knockout. And, you know, things probably didn't go that way. But I think in the second time, the fact that he's getting right back in there, I think he can stand in the pocket with Boser, and he's got the faster hand speed, more power, in my opinion, more aggressive. And I think that in the betting lines, man, he should be favored here. You know, I think that people got this loss to Arlovsky misconstrued. He stopped throwing this and that. Hey, I disagree with that statement too, but yeah, the volume did slow down, but I think in the second fight he'll correct those things. They're just small adjustments, and I think that Tanner Boser is just. I know he went 3 with Cyril Gane, but he kind of has this style of sitting back, single shots, and if he starts to take a lot of damage, he'll just sit back and he'll be okay with that. So I think that Philipe Lins is going to come out here, stand with Tanner Boser in the middle, move forward, land the harder shots, and either get a knockout. But if it goes all 3 rounds, I actually think he gets the decision this time. So I'm gonna go with Philipe Lins.
Yeah, look, Philipe Lins definitely let me down in that debut, but I was high on him for a reason. He showed a well-rounded skill set in the PFL. The guy can strike. He's got a jiu-jitsu black belt. And one thing about Tanner Boser is, he's kind of got volume for a heavyweight. He's good at doing a little bit of the point fighting. He's got a nice jab, a good leg kick game. He can circle on the outside. So if Philipe Lins does come out here with very low output, that's the way that Tanner Boser can kind of weasel a decision. But aside from that, I do expect Philipe Lins to come out here, throw more. And I think the difference is going to be that when he lands his shots, they're going to be more impactful than that of Tanner Boser's. And this is going to be a chance for Philipe Lins to reintroduce himself to the UFC fans, because I know that first impression wasn't the best, but I still think he's got more to show. And I think we have seen the finished product from Tanner Boser. Look, he's solid. He did way better than I expected him to, especially in those first 2 fights. Because I was under the impression that he was like a Canadian big country. It turns out that's not the case. He's got a nice point fighting style. But regardless of that, I think that Lins is the more skilled guy. I think he's got the higher ceiling, and I think he's going to come out here and prove it and get his first UFC win. Now, next up in the middleweight division, we got a matchup between Brendan All-In Allen. He's 14-3, and Kyle Daukaus is 9-0. Currently, they got Brendan Allen -310. The comeback on Kyle Daukaus is +255. Shaq, this is interesting because they got a very similar style to each other. Kyle Daukaus kind of does what Brendan Allen does. It's just that he's a little bit more on the greener side. He hasn't taken the setbacks like Brendan Allen has. And, I'm not going to say he hasn't paid his dues, because he definitely has. But I think that Brendan Allen's the more experienced guy here. But is this an upset spot, or do you think Brendan Allen rolls?
Man, this is an interesting fight because, I actually before he's supposed to fight, Brendan was supposed to fight Heinisch, and I was looking forward to that fight. And Kyle Daukaus, I actually didn't see his Contender Series fight when it happened, so I had no idea who he was. I was thinking the guy was probably going to be, a complete, just Greene or. But man, I came away impressed. I thought the guy was actually, he might not be there quite yet, but I think he's got a bright, bright future, man. I think that the line is wide because, Brendan submitted Holland, ran through Tom Breeze. Like, there's 2 wins in the UFC. He's definitely done his thing. He's been looking the best he ever has. But, man, I potentially think he could be playing a little bit with fire here, man. This guy, Daukaus, is super big. I think they said he used to be a former heavyweight, if I'm not mistaken. The guy, he's super talented, man. A big, long southpaw with jiu-jitsu skills as well. It's gonna be a good fight, man. Brendan, pretty much comes out here and initiates the grappling right off the bat and forces the takedowns, and he's so strong that he just kind of been overwhelming these guys lately. And when he gets on top of them, they just seem like, man, this guy's so strong on top, man. I can't get him off me. And he's come a long way from losing to guys like Fluffy Hernandez and Anders. He was super young. I think Brendan's still only like 24 or 25. So, the sky's the limit for that kid, man. Obviously I favor him to win, but man, I think there's a possibility it could be a sweat, man. I think that Daukaus is super big. I think the southpaw stance could give Brendan possibly a little trouble, and if he mismanages, his energy on the mat and they have to get back up to the feet, like, I think Daukaus has the skills to potentially, cause some problems, man. So although I'm a pick Brendan for the win here, I don't think it's going to be as dominant as people are probably thinking, just because, he's been on this run. Let's just be honest here. I got Kyle Daukaus over Tom Breeze, and that's just facts. So, I think that I'll take Brendan for the win. He's been looking good, man. He's very confident. He wants to fight in that top 15, but I'm very high on Kyle Daukaus. I think he's got a bright future ahead of him, but we'll see what happens, man. But obviously, I'll go with Brendan for the win.
Yeah, look, it's interesting because these guys have very similar styles. They're trying to do the same thing, and they're also both huge for the weight class. Daukaus is 6'3". He's got the undefeated record, and he'll body these guys, man. He's so physical in there. It's just that my issue with this matchup is that Daukaus kind of reminds me of Brendan Allen a couple of years ago. Remember when Brendan Allen just couldn't get over the hump in the LFA? He would keep losing those title fights, and then eventually he won, paid his dues, won on Contender Series, won his 2 UFC fights. So I feel like Kyle Daukaus might be right at that point where he's going to have a bright future, no doubt about it. And I like the guy. You hear him talk, and he's been dieting this entire time. He's been training hard. He's a true professional, so we can't take anything away from him. This isn't like a regular short notice fill-in where, the guy's, been eating Cheetos on the couch. Kyle Daukaus has been training this entire time. My only thing is this. So his fight before Contender Series, he did dominate Jonathan Webb and finish him, but like there was a moment when Jonathan Webb took his back, or even the fight after Contender Series where that guy almost pounded him out, or the guy after, some fat dude took his back. So it's like, if these guys are getting these little, positions on you and having these little moments against you, I just feel like when Brendan Allen gets on top, that the fight might actually be over shortly after. Now, I could also see a back and forth scramble fest because, Daukaus is a black belt himself, black belt versus black belt. But I feel like Brendan Allen's really coming to his own. All those, because dude, I know you remember how we used to feel about Brendan Allen back when he was on the regional scene. And it's like, oh, look, Brendan Allen lost another LFA title fight, and then eventually he got over that hump, and now he's really shining in the UFC. So I feel like that experience has to count for something. I'm not going to count out Kyle Daukaus. I think he's tough, but I simply think that when Brendan Allen gets him in some of those spots that some of these other regional opponents got him in, that it might be over soon after. So I'm going to go with Brendan Allen to stop Kyle Daukaus, but I think Daukaus will be back for sure. Now, next up in the heavyweight division, we got a matchup between Maurice Greene, he's 9-4, and Gian Villante, or as we like to say in Brazil, Shaq, Gian Villante, is 17-11. Currently, they got Maurice Greene -230. The comeback on Gian Villante is +190. Well, Shaq, the crochet boss, Maurice Greene, now he's doing this camp at Jackson. So, he's got the elevation to work with. He's got some big bodies in the room. And with Gian Villante, he doesn't have to cut weight anymore. So at least he's got that going for him. Are we still under the impression that Gian Villante is on his way out, or could this be a rebirth in his career here at heavyweight?
That was funny. But, man, Maurice Greene, he kind of gets a bad rap. But, man, it's another one of those things where I think people have things misconstrued. I think that, everyone's kind of pissed at him because I know there were a lot of bets on him to beat Olenek that last fight. And he ended up getting submitted. But, man, it's another one of those things where I just think that Greene kind of got a little bit rushed up, man, because, on past podcasts, I'm super high on that kid Pavlovich, man. Ever since he lost to Overeem, he's come back and he's absolutely run through these dudes like it's nothing. And I think he's got another guy with a bright future ahead of him. And then Olenek, I know the technique's sloppy, but how many submissions does he have? Like fucking, and going into that fight, I said we can't bet on Maurice Greene just because we don't know where, his ground game is going to be at against a guy with this amount of submissions. And fucking, for Christ's sake, man, Olenek just beat Verdum, that's got to count for something. I just think Greene was fighting at a level that he's not good enough to fight at yet. But now that you take this step down in competition with Villante, and look, Villante's a tough guy, but Dan, when's the last time Gian Villante looked good in a fight?
I don't know, if ever. He's had exciting fights, but look good is a different question.
When has Gian Villante ever looked good in a fight? That's what. Oh. You know what I'm saying? Even his best performance, Corey Anderson, a fun fact, a lot of people don't even know that he was down 2-0 on 2 of the cards, as crazy as that sounds. When he was landing all those low kicks. But yeah, I think it's a good spot for Greene to come out here and get a win. I think that he's the bigger guy. He throws more volume with the low kicks. Is Maurice Greene in general that good? No, but I actually think that in a lot of these spots you could possibly, I think with Gian Villante's borderline retirement, man, I think that his last fight he got absolutely ran through. They're talking about his fight before that. It was a slobber knocker with Ed Short Fuse Herman where both guys wobbled. The Sam Malvey fight, he got wobbled. You know, the all those fights were ugly, sloppy fights where you're just looking at John Villante's health. Man, to be honest, when he was scheduled to fight Rothwell, I was honestly considering putting 7 to 10 units on Rothwell, man. I was like, there's just no way in hell this heavyweight thing is gonna work out, bro. He's too slow. You know, if he's looking to come in with more power, I just think that he's gonna get countered and knocked out against these guys, man. So I'm gonna go with Maurice Greene. And I don't think the line is necessarily too high, to be honest, man. I think that in a lot of these spots, you could see, you know, Villante, fade him all the way up to, you know, minus 300, 350. He's got nothing left. But I obviously people are a little hesitant because Maurice Greene cost him his last fight. But I'm going to go with Greene here by knockout or lopsided decision. I think he throws a lot more volume. His boxing isn't the best, but I just think John Villante's health is just not good, and it hasn't been good in a long. We're talking about, remember the Tom Lawler fight back in the day, bro? You remember the Ilir Latifi fight back in the day? I mean, like, John Villante ain't even his fight of the night win over Saperbek Safarov. I mean, bro, those fights are like uncomfortable at times, man. And, you know, I think he's moving up to heavyweight because he's old. He's got a foot out the door. He just had a baby. He doesn't want to cut weight anymore. And he's looking to get this nice fat payday. So, you know, I'm going to go with Maurice Greene here.
Yeah, look, Greene's got a lot of physical tools here. He's 6'7". He's got the massive reach. And it seemed to me like he was starting to really, you know, use that range and that length better than he ever has his last few fights. I know he got stopped in those fights, but I was seeing progress every single time out, you know, compared to the Jeff Hughes fight, to the Junior Albini fight, and then the Alexi fight, he had some good moments on the feet. So I feel like he's been progressing, and now that he went down to Jackson Wink, I know they've been losing a lot of fights, but at least they got some heavyweights there for him to work with. He said the issue with Factory X was that, you know, despite them being a great gym, he just didn't have any big guys to move around with. So he kind of felt like he was maintaining instead of improving, whereas now he's got the high elevation to work on the cardio, and he's got a bunch of bodies to work with. So that's one good thing. And with Villante, I heard his interview, and doesn't seem like his training situation is exactly the best. You know, I hear all the gyms over there in New York are closed down, so he's just kind of been doing the garage thing, you know. He's just been doing the basics to maintain, whereas I feel like Maurice Greene's actually adding to his skill set. So I'm going to go with Maurice Greene as well, not to mention the current state of Villante. You know, he got ran through by a tiny 205er in Mikal last fight, and I think it's going to be something similar here, a body kick, a knee, a straight, something along the way. It's just that Maurice Greene's got to be careful early, because early on, look, one thing about Villante is he hits hard, and that's about the extent of it. You know, he'll wing some big overhands. He's got a nice kick as well, but his cardio, his decision-making, all that stuff has always been very shady. And let me just say this. Shout out to Villante. Check out his Strikeforce fight versus Chad Griggs. One of the best one-round fights I've ever seen. He actually gets knocked out in that fight, but unbelievable fight. So make sure you watch John Villante versus Chad Griggs on YouTube or on Fight Pass. Amazing fight. But I'm going to go with Maurice Greene here via knockout or decision as well. Co-main event in the evening in the welterweight division. We got a matchup between Platinum Mike Perry, he's 13-6, and Mickey Gall is 6-2. Currently, they got Mike Perry minus 320. The comeback on Mickey Gall is plus 260. Shaq, this is interesting, man, because it's like, if I'm guaranteed the Mike Perry, you know, just if he's got, you know, the right people behind him and he's in amazing shape, like when he fought Vicente Luque or, you know, some of his great wins, then I might not only pick him here, I might actually max bet him here. It's just that when you're dealing with a guy in Mike Perry who, you know, people are thinking, oh, is he just playing with everyone, saying that he's got no coaches and he's got his girlfriend? No, he's not playing with anyone. He's entirely serious. You know, me and you know what happened, but let's just say he got kicked out his gym earlier this year. Look, his whole life, not to shit on the guy because I'm a fan, he's very exciting to watch, but like, the guy gets married in February, gets divorced in March, leaves his gym that same month. Now he's in Texas, with training with some amateurs. So I'm not really entirely sure what his motivation is or what his training situation is. I just know that he does not have Julian Williams with him, who got him to this point. And I'd think that if you're, training to fight a guy like Mickey Gall, the one thing Mickey Gall brings to the table, he does have a black belt in jiu-jitsu. At least get those grappling rounds in with a guy like Julian Williams, with a guy like Jacare, all the people they had at Fusion XL. So I think he kind of thinks this is a joke. And, I know for a fact our supporters remember the fact that, our biggest wager to date, or one of them, was Randy Brown against Mickey Gall. And the reason why is because Mickey Gall got signed to the UFC with a 1-0 record. So it makes sense why we'd fade him against anyone legitimate. I mean, think about this, Shaq. You go from fighting Mike Jackson and CM Punk, right, which is basically the equivalent of 2 regional fights. And then all of a sudden it's like, here's Randy Brown at MSG. You know what I mean? Like, that's like the biggest leap I've ever seen in my life. And Mickey actually hung in there, man. He went all 3 rounds. He even won the second round on all 3 judges' scorecards. Me and you were thinking this is about to be a walk in the park. We're going to lay him out in the first 30 seconds, and then Mickey's on top of us in the second round, and we're like praying for Randy to survive. So that was the first moment, back in 2017, where I was like, look, Mickey's extremely green. He probably doesn't belong right now, but at least he's tough. At least he's a gamer. So I didn't think like, man, this guy, is a quitter or anything. I was like, he's tough as hell. He just doesn't really have the skills right now. So he got a chance to develop a little bit more, got that first round sub against George Sullivan. Then they throw him in there with a UFC Hall of Famer and Diego. The fight starts out, and he literally thinks he's Joe Lozon, thinks he's about to knock him out in the first minute. And when that didn't happen, he completely gassed out. Then comes back a few months later, and the thing you got to understand is these guys with 10 fights or less, they're going to be making these huge leaps every single time we see them. And the leap I saw from the Diego Sanchez fight to the Salim Touari fight was a massive step in the right direction, because he actually went out there and doubled any strike count he's had up until that point. He landed 50 strikes, which doesn't sound like much, but when you compare it to any of his previous performances, and then you look at the fact that, hey, he's still young, he's still growing, if he can just build off that, the next fight might be even better. And the interesting thing about this is that he showed solid fight IQ, and he had a willingness to dig deep when the going got tough, because he did get tired in that second round, but he kept pushing and actually went out to dominate the third. So that was a massive step in the right direction, and it's been about 10 months since then. So if he can build off that, listen, it's a situation where you got a guy who's training every single day trying to improve as quick as possible, whereas I know Perry's not evolving at all. He's just maintaining, because he's not training with any coaches. He's simply just getting in shape for the fight, but he's not adding anything to his skill set. So this might be the time where Gall can actually level up and finally get a big win under his belt. It's just certain things are going to have to take place for that to happen, because I feel like Mike Perry's not just going to come out here and, fight smart, set up his shots, knock this guy out. I feel like he thinks this is such a joke that he might come out here trying to taunt the guy, and one mistake on the mat and he could get choked out. So I kind of lined it closer to where the opener was, around, the minus 150 to minus 170 range for Mike Perry. So here at minus 300, I think it's a dog or pass situation, and mixed with everything that's been going on, this might be a spot to roll the dice. And I think that Mickey Gall might shock a lot of people. I might be dead wrong, but I think this Saturday has all the ingredients for him to rise to the occasion and choke out Mike Perry somewhere along the way. So I'm going to actually go with Mickey Gall for the upset here, Shaq.
Yeah, Mike Perry is a guy where I've never really been that impressed with him. When he first came in, he definitely had a lot of hype, but you could just see eventually that he would get exposed, and that's exactly what's happened. I think that he is a little bit insecure. I think that he's got a lot of problems, like you mentioned before, but Mike Perry's a one of a kind, man. I think that Mickey, like you said, there was definitely a step in the right direction in that fight with Salim Touari. He definitely gutted it out after that rough second round. Man, obviously Perry's fought a level of competition. I definitely think it's a step down in competition for Perry to go from the names that he's been fighting, Vicente Luque, Jeff Neal, Alex Cowboy Oliveira, Cerrone, all these guys. And, I don't think Mickey's anywhere on that level, but I like what I've been hearing from Mickey. Sounds like he's in a good space mentally. It seems like he got really humbled from that Diego Sanchez fight. And it seems like he's been saying all the right things, doing all the right things. I actually disagree with the opening line. I think it should have been a little wide if I was personally setting the line, just because look, I ain't no Mike Perry fan. I think the dude's an idiot. I think like everything he says is borderline, retarded. I think like the guy is stupid. It's just, I think it's a big gap for Mickey to cover. I think that although Mike Perry is average, he's 6-6 in the UFC. He got knocked out. Was that the first time he got knocked out in his last fight? Yeah, the first time.
In MMA,
You said what?
In MMA it was, but he got knocked out in boxing too. But yeah, MMA first knockout loss.
First time he got knocked out, his last fight. Mixed in with the whole girl thing. So just Mike Perry in general, I think money-wise is bad business right now. Like, the whole girlfriend being his coach thing. Man, that's something else. I mean, but this is what he does, man. He's had his girl giving him advice in the past, break a leg, Mike, break a leg. But, man, I think Mickey is in the right direction. It's just I don't see in what department where he's going to get this done, man. I think, if, the angle of he can submit him. I think Perry, honestly, I know he got submitted by Cerrone, but I think he's got underrated wrestling. He took down Cerrone. He took down Alex Cowboy Oliveira. He was able to weather the storm and win those late rounds. I think the Vicente fight, those level of fighters, he's just not going to beat simple. But he had a good showing. The volume of Vicente was what got him the nod over Perry's just every so often big punches. And Jeff Neal, we know that Jeff Neal's a top 10 guy, and it actually looked like Perry clipped him, and then he got kind of reckless and ate a high kick and then, eventually went down. But nah, man, you make some good points. Betting perspective, it's dog or pass 100%. It's just I don't see where Mickey's going to get this win if Perry's just that shot and he gives up his back. But I actually think Perry's got a good, strong clinch game on the fence. I think he can kind of overpower Mickey, kind of frustrate him in the strength department. And Mickey, he still kind of flops to his back in that Salim. And one thing about the Salim Touari fight, like, I'm not going to discredit Mickey for that win. It was it was his best performance against, somewhat of a real fighter. But Salim Touari, man, even though I don't like Mike Perry and I think he's an idiot, it's just complete night and day, the intensity level, just the like Salim Touari is out the UFC if I'm not mistaken, man. I think that Salim Touari worries too much, is hesitant to throw, and that was something that, like, going into that fight, I was like, oh, man, Salim Touari, yeah, for sure he'll beat Mickey, but then I watched the tape on him. I think I told you that this guy fights like Sung Bin Jo. This guy, he doesn't throw. He's absolutely terrified to fight, and I think that was one of the reasons why. I mean, if I was Mickey's manager, I would have went with something more along those lines, but I think Mickey's going in the right direction. I just don't think he's ready to beat Mike Perry just yet, but I think that is going to play out closer. But I see Mike Perry kind of just bullying him and, tying him up on the fence and just and I don't want to say the kid's an overrated black belt because he does have 4 rear naked chokes, but I do see areas on the ground where, he does lose position and, he will flop to his back. So I think Perry could capitalize, but with Perry's mental state, man, who knows? But I'll go with Mike Perry.
Main event of the evening in the lightweight division, we got Dustin the Diamond Poirier. He's 25-6, and Dan the Hangman Hooker is 20-8. Currently, they got Dustin Poirier -235. The comeback on Dan Hooker is +195. So, Shaq, it's a bit of a wide line here. So they're expecting Dustin to come out here and run through Dan Hooker. And I could totally see it. If you're guaranteeing me the Dustin Poirier that fought Justin Gaethje and Max Holloway, the fact that he already has his amazing power, which he's had his entire career, but the output against guys like Gaethje and Holloway, he was landing over 300 or throwing over 300 strikes in those bouts, mixed with the intensity, the hunger. That guy, I don't think he just beats Dan Hooker. I think he runs through Dan Hooker, possibly in the first round. It's just that coming off the title loss, is Dustin still as hungry and as intense as he's always been? Because that's my big question here. I'm not doubting the Diamond at all. Just historically speaking, based off fighters coming off the title loss, you know how it is, Shaq. So, what's your opinion of this line and the matchup in general?
Yeah, it's a great matchup. I think that Hooker's been looking good. He's got these nice victories, but as far as how they match up, I think Hooker's long, rangy, maybe even slightly better kickboxing, Dustin better boxing. But man, I think this fight's gonna come down to the intangibles, man, and mindset. I think that Dustin's coming off the title loss. It is kind of a dreaded spot, but man, just I don't want to say I'm close to the situation, but just knowing this guy's mentality, man, I think that it's never wavered since this loss. I think he's been training the entire time, and he's looking to, get back in there. I don't think that he got deterred or, discouraged by anything. I think he took Dan Hooker very seriously, and he's very well prepared for this fight. And Hooker, this is the biggest fight of his life, a huge opportunity for him. So as far as like their most recent fights, Hooker's last three in particular, he knocked out Vic, who, in my opinion, just, ever since the Gaethje fight, it's just kind of been, and the Felder fight, it's just kind of been, hasn't been his night. He just can't take that damage anymore. So that win, although it was a fucking great knockout, I just think it was more so circumstantial. The Ally Akinta fight was a great fight as well. Great performance, dominated him from start to finish with the low kicks. But also, I feel like Ally Akinta is just not the caliber of fighter that everyone thought he was, ever was. And, it was a good performance, but Ally Akinta just isn't a legitimate threat, in my opinion, in terms of upper echelon of lightweights. But hey, he treated him accordingly. And then so the Paul Felder fight is what I really want to get into. It was a great back and forth fight. Hooker was able to get the nod in Australia, and it was a great performance, man. I thought he did a very good job of keeping his range, but and we know that he's got the check knees, his boxing good. Hooker's a very, very sharp fighter. And it was his first 5-round fight, so I'm sure he, got a little bit more confidence. What I'll say is in those late rounds, man, one thing I noticed is that Hooker's defense isn't as sharp as it is in the late rounds as it is in the early rounds. I feel like as the fight progresses, he progressively starts to drop his hands. His chin progressively starts to tilt up, and I feel like he bleeds very easily. And I feel like, I think he just kind of, I don't want to say breaks, because he definitely got through that fight. He was able to get that last takedown. But, in spots where Paul Felder, no offense to Paul Felder, a great fighter, I just think that a guy like Dustin Poirier, if he gets in spots like that, is really going to make Dan Hooker pay. I feel like Paul Felder's a guy where, his biggest issue is, Paul, let it go. Paul, you need to open up a little bit more, and I feel like Paul just has this issue where he kind of stays in this tight Muay Thai stance, and he just never you got at some point in some of these fights, man, you just got to go after him. And I feel that's where Paul is going to regret that loss. I feel like Paul had several opportunities to just say, hey, let's get into it and let's go after him. And he kind of just sat back and he kind of did what, Paul Felder does in a lot of his losses. And, he didn't throw enough. He let Hooker kind of slightly outwork him. So I think that Dustin Poirier, needs to play this very careful early, because I think Hooker is very charged up. He's very excited about this opportunity, and he thinks that he's gonna get an early knockout. But I think that if this fight becomes a war, if adversity pops up, I feel like one guy's gonna be prepared for it and one guy's not. I've been seeing a lot of Dan Hooker saying he's getting the knockout, but what happens if both guys end up getting bloody and this becomes a blood and tooth a guts and nails type of fight, man? I don't think that, I'm not saying that he showed his toughness against Edson Barboza 100%, but in a fight against Dustin Poirier, who I consider one of the best lightweights of all time, you need to be ready to go 5 rounds. And in those 5 rounds, you're going to get hit with some type of blows that, Paul Felder kind of let you off the hook. In a sense, Dustin Poirier will not let you off the hook. The volume is only going to start picking up. That victory over Max Holloway. Max Holloway, what's he known for? That punch count, that volume, that endless amount of punches. And Dustin Poirier met him in the middle, and if not through more volume than him, man. So I got Dustin Poirier in this fight. I understand Hooker could. I mean, it's lightweight. These at this in this division, anyone can get knocked out. But I feel like the intangibles, the heart of Dustin Poirier, and I feel like people, say, Dustin's been hearing it for years. He's got a suspect chin. He's chinny, this and that, and I feel like his defense along the years has gotten so much more sharper. He's defensively sound. He doesn't make those same lunging mistakes as he used to, and I feel like he's gonna not only come out here and beat Dan Hooker, but finish Dan Hooker. And I think that he's gonna reintroduce his name into in that title picture, man. I think that Dan Hooker is going to get outclassed on Saturday night, but I respect his skills as a fighter. But I just think that Dustin Poirier is too tough, and I think he's just as hungry. I know a lot of people coming off these title fights falter a little bit, and maybe that does happen. Maybe it is just Hooker's time, but I disagree when it comes to Dustin Poirier, man. I think that he's still focused. He's got flashers on. He's not thinking about anything else. He didn't underestimate Hooker in any sense. A lot of times, like for example, Tyron Woodley. For example, when he was coming off his title fight, time in and time in, he was kind of trying to discredit Burns, like, oh, if he loses, saying shit like that, oh, he only lost to a champ. As where Dustin Poirier, he doesn't think like that, man. He's got one of the best mindsets in the sport, and I just think that he's a more crisper boxer than Dan Hooker, especially in the late rounds. And I think he's going to get the better of him, make this a blender, make this a ugly, bloody type of fight, and I think he knocks Dan Hooker out somewhere in that second or third round.
Yeah, speaking of the mindset, something interesting I heard in their interviews, when they asked Dustin Poirier about any future matchups, he's like, my mindset is only on Dan Hooker right now, and because, these journalists love to ask about what's next, even though the fight hasn't happened yet for whatever reason. But when they asked Dan Hooker about that, he's like, if I win, I can fight Gaethje or Khabib, but if I lose, I can, beat Charles Oliveira and get back in there. And I'm like, wait, Charles Oliveira? I'm like, dude, you're fighting Dustin Poirier. Let's not think about anything else except Dustin, because if you have one foot out the door, if you're slightly looking at something else, you're not just going to get beat down, you're going to get knocked out. And the Poirier that we've been seeing lately is the best Poirier we've ever seen. Obviously, like we already mentioned, the power has always been there, but now the cardio, the output, for him to match or exceed the output of guys like Max Holloway and Justin Gaethje, it's already been proven that, he's diverse enough to not just go out there and get a first-round knockout, but he can win these extended out wars, these long fights where it really comes down to the will and who wants it more. And you don't often see guys that want it more than Justin Gaethje. You don't often see guys that want it more than Max Holloway, and that's exactly what he proved in there. And, the Khabib fight, listen, Khabib does that to everyone, and not to mention Hooker ain't about to come out here and, Hooker ain't about to do that to Dustin, right? So, look, Dustin just has to be careful here, because I know he's going to rock Hooker early, and when he does that, and the Poirier blitz, the Poirier finishing combo every time he's got an opponent hurt and he just goes crazy. Just has to be careful there because Hooker's a very, very durable guy. He's a little extra durable than these guys. He kind of reminds me of like Max Holloway, just with a little bit more knockout power, maybe an inch or two taller. You know what I mean? So it's going to have to be a same kind of approach. When you hurt the guy, keep hurting him over and over again. Don't let him off the hook, because this guy Hooker's got some sneaky tools. Those knees, I really got a lot of respect for those knees, man. Like, you'll just pump them up out of nowhere, and he gets them up real high. So, if Dustin's ducking his head a little bit too much, he's got to be careful not to eat one of those. And also, when they're trading in the pocket, Hooker is sharp. I know his name's Hooker. He's sharp with those hooks, man, straight up. And he can lay people out. He can switch stances like Holloway, but he's got that one-punch power too. But he can also point fight as well. So Hooker brings a lot of good things to the table. It's just the firepower that Dustin brings is far superior. And, you know, anyone can get knocked out in this fight, but I think that if it actually plays out and we get to see both of their skill sets over the 5-round duration, that Dustin Poirier is far superior, and I think he's going to prove that tomorrow night in Vegas. And honestly, man, while I could see the 5-round war, I could totally see that happening, I think Dustin's going to get back to vintage Dustin. I think he's going to come out here and knock Hooker out in the first round. I think if he looks anything like he did against Gaethje or Holloway, it's going to be vicious. I think he's got Hooker completely outgunned. Just got to be on your P's and Q's because Hooker's a very tricky and opportunistic, sniper-like kind of guy. So show up the best you ever have, Dustin, and you win this fight, most likely by knockout. So, yeah, I'm going with the Diamond Dustin Poirier here to get back in the win column and start a new run towards the title. Well, Shaq, now we got to talk about the fight to watch and the fighter to watch. So what is the fight to watch for UFC on ESPN 12?
My fight to watch is going to be the co-main event between Mickey Gall and Mike Perry. You know, if Mickey Gall can get this win, he will solidify himself and finally start to get some of that respect, you know, that he kind of lost after that Diego Sanchez fight. And then Perry, I mean, Perry needs a win bad, man. He's 6-6. You know, if he loses this, he'll be 6-7. I'm not sure what his contract situation is, but I remember a couple of years ago somebody said that he might be fighting in Indian casinos, you know, soon, and it's approaching that point coming up here shortly. So, you know, he needs to win bad. I mean, what's going on in the media hasn't been looking too good. That's my fight to watch. So.
And it's not just what's been going on in the media. There's stuff me and you know about that hasn't even been released. So, you know, we wish both these guys the best. But for me, my fight to watch is Luis Pena versus Khama Worthy because I got so many questions about both guys, where they are. But one thing I don't have a question about, Shaq, is I know this is going to be an exciting fight. I know they're going to throw down. There's a chance someone gets knocked out, choked out, or it's a 3-round war. So that much I know. But I also want all my questions answered about Khama Worthy's grappling. Was the Devontae Smith fight, you know, a flash in the pan, or is he about to come out here and make a run? And Luis Pena, he's been in the UFC since a very young age and a very, you know, ripe time in his career. So what kind of progress has he been making? So for all those reasons, Shaq, Pena versus Worthy is my fight to watch. Well, Shaq, who is your fighter to watch for UFC Vegas for?
I'm going to say Sean Woodson, man. Actually, I know that a lot of people think that he, you know, probably has an easy matchup here, but Erosa's a tough kid, and I feel like Sean Woodson can potentially be a matchup problem for a lot of these guys at 45 that, you know, where their height is 5'8" or below or 5'9" or below, because, you know, if they start ducking that head down, those knees are coming right up the middle. And I think that this fight against Erosa is going to tell us a lot, man, of where he really lies in this division. If he, you know, somewhat, you know, has a lackluster decision against Erosa, then maybe they need to go the slow path. But if he comes out here and puts Julian Erosa away, you know, in the first round, then I feel like they need to give this kid a bigger step up than Nelson. You know, I feel like maybe, you know, give him you know, I don't know, maybe Jourdain or something, you know. I feel like, you know, Sean Woodson's got a lot of potential.
I hear Villante weighed in 255, so gotta see what that was all about. But for me, my fighter to watch is Dustin the Diamond Poirier. Look, this is a guy that can retire right now, and he'll already go down in history as one of the most exciting lightweights in the history of the sport. I mean, just one of the most exciting lighter weight fighters in the history of the sport, because let's not forget about his run at featherweight where he was top 5 the entire time, right? So this guy's been putting on some of the most exciting fights in the history of the sport, and oftentimes when you call guys exciting fighters, it's almost like you're making up for something. You're calling them exciting. They're exciting, but they're not quite a top guy, right? You know, the fact that, you know, he's not a top 5 guy, but he's exciting. Whereas with Poirier, he's a top 3 guy, and he's the most exciting guy in the company. So it's one of those situations where he can literally add to his legacy here with a new run and with a win here over Hooker, because it's like what he's already accomplished. I don't know if you guys recall. So he obviously had his run at featherweight, but when he first came to lightweight for the first run, and he knocked out Diego Ferreira and Bobby Greene, beat the shit out of Joe Duffy, Yancy Medeiros, all these guys. Right then and there, we were like, dude, oh my God, he's looking incredible. He had the setback to Michael Johnson. People thought, hey, that's the cap right there. Then he went on an even more historic run when he beat Holloway, when he beat Gaethje, when he beat Pettis, Eddie Alvarez, all these guys. So right then and there, he's already proven that, hey, I'm taking things to a new gear. Then obviously had the setback against Khabib. But now, if he can go out there, start a new run with Hooker, we're looking at just more legendary stuff from the great Dustin Poirier. So for that reason, he is my fighter to watch. Well, Shaq, we did it. It's going down this Saturday in Vegas. Dustin Poirier versus Dan Hooker. They can get our bets at bestfightpicks.com. Use that promo code Dan25 for 25% off my plays. Use Shaq's code Shaq50 for 50% off his. Or use the promo code 2020 for 20% off the VIPs. You can follow Shaq at MMA Genius 05 or Shaq BFP on Instagram. You can follow me at Best Fight Picks on Twitter, Best Fight Picks Official on Instagram, or follow the pod at Half the Battle Pod on IG or Half the Battle HQ on Twitter. Subscribe to Half the Battle on iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, Stitcher, Spotify, all the places where we are available. We'll be back in 2 weeks because, Fight Island is about to come up after this. It's going to be a fun little stretch there. So thank you very much, everyone, for the support. And until the next time, let's cash these bets.